Most people think intelligence agencies stop terrorists using surveillance, phone taps, data analysis, watch lists, but some of the most important intelligence comes from something far more dangerous. A human being, someone who walks directly into a terrorist network pretending to be one of them. Because in rare and extremely sensitive operations, MI5 sends undercover officers inside terrorist groups, not informants, not recruited insiders. Actual intelligence officers operating under a false identity. And when this happens, the risks are enormous. If the cover breaks, the officer could disappear without warning. So how does MI5 actually do this? How does someone become an undercover intelligence officer and enter one of the most dangerous environments in the country? To understand that, we first need to understand when MI5 would even consider an operation like this, because sending an officer undercover is one of the most extreme intelligence tools available. Most investigations never reach this point. Normally, MI5 gathers intelligence using surveillance, phone metadata, internet activity, financial records, travel patterns. They also rely heavily on informants, people already inside extremist networks who secretly provide information. But sometimes those methods are not enough. Sometimes a network is too closed, too careful, too suspicious of outsiders. And when that happens, intelligence agencies face a serious problem. They may know a group exists. They may know the group is dangerous, but they cannot see what is happening inside. That is when undercover operations may become an option. But MI5 cannot simply send someone into a terrorist group. These operations require extremely careful planning, and the first step is choosing the right officer. Undercover intelligence officers are not typical investigators. They must have a very specific skill set. They need the ability to build trust with people who are often highly suspicious. They need emotional control. They need the ability to live under a false identity for long periods of time. And they need the psychological resilience to operate in extremely dangerous environments. Because undercover work can last months, sometimes years. The officer must completely adopt a new identity, a new background, a new life story. This identity is known as a legend. And building that legend is one of the most complex parts of the operation. The legend must be believable. It must survive background checks. It must stand up to questioning. And it must match the environment the officer is trying to enter. Every detail matters. Where the person grew up, what schools they attended, where they worked, who their friends are. Even small inconsistencies can destroy an undercover operation. So the legend is constructed carefully. Documents are created, online traces may be built, and the officer spends months learning every detail of their new identity. Once the cover identity is ready, the next step is infiltration. But infiltration rarely happens overnight. Extremist networks do not trust strangers, so the officer usually begins by entering the broader environment around the group. This might mean frequenting the same locations, online forums, community spaces, social circles where the group operates. Gradually, the officer becomes a familiar presence, someone people recognize, someone who appears to share similar views or interests. Over time, connections begin to form, conversations happen, introductions are made, and eventually the officer may gain access to individuals closer to the core of the network. But even then, trust is not automatic. Extremist groups often test new members. They watch behavior. They ask questions. They look for inconsistencies. They may even conduct their own background checks. This is where the officer's training becomes critical, because every conversation matters. Every reaction, every detail. The officer must remain consistent with their cover identity at all times. One mistake could expose everything. And if the officer is accepted into the group, the real intelligence work begins. Now the officer is in a position that surveillance could never achieve. They can observe conversations directly, understand internal dynamics, identify leaders, discover plans that have never been communicated electronically. This kind of human intelligence is incredibly valuable because it reveals how a network actually operates. Who influences decisions? Who provides funding? Who might be planning something more dangerous? But undercover officers rarely act alone. Behind the scenes, the operation is supported by a large intelligence team. Handlers communicate with the officer. Security teams monitor risk. Analysts process the information coming out of the operation. And every step is carefully controlled. Because if something goes wrong, extraction may become necessary. Extraction is the process of safely removing the officer from the operation. Sometimes this happens quietly. The officer gradually reduces contact and disappears from the network. Other times, extraction must happen immediately, especially if the officer's identity is at risk of being exposed, and once the operation ends, the intelligence gathered can become extremely important. It may lead to arrests, it may prevent attacks, or it may help authorities understand how extremist networks are evolving. But operations like this are rare, because the risks are enormous, and sending an officer into a terrorist group is always a last resort. Most counter-terror investigations rely on technology and surveillance. But sometimes the only way to truly understand a threat is to place someone directly inside it, someone who hears the conversations, sees the plans, and reports back before it is too late. And when that happens, the operation becomes one of the most dangerous roles in modern intelligence. Because undercover officers operate in the shadows, their identities hidden, their missions secret. And most of the time, the public never even knows they were there. But in the world of intelligence, some of the most important battles are fought quietly, from the inside,